Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about the late game of Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires and why it is simply just not that great of an experience, and why I personally focus so heavily in many of my videos on the early game. This particular campaign that you're seeing over here, turn 62 as the Cast Dwarves, as Drazif the Ashen, it is over. I have achieved my short campaign victory conditions. I am very close to my long campaign victory conditions, and once that's done, that is it. I have won this campaign. In point of fact, I won this campaign well over 20 turns ago. Right now, I am just invading Cafe for the hell of it. And also dealing with Karakadrin. I have a massive alliance with Queek. I have an alliance with Kugaf, who's pretty useless, and I have alliances with Astrogoth and Zaytan. And actually, I'm going to confederate Zaytan at this particular point. He's got some nice, lovely tower seats that I would really like to get my hands on at this point in my campaign. Suffice to say, that is the early game of any campaign in every single Total War game. It's not even an issue of Warhammer 3, but it is the early game in virtually every single campaign in Total War in general that constitutes the meat of a Total War experience. This is not really a great situation that Total War does have on its hands. In point of fact, the fact that these games in general, but especially Warhammer 3 and Immortal Empires, are so front-heavy is not a superb experience, because without the late game being fun and interesting, you miss out on a lot of things. Like, let me give you a particular example. Do you know how many campaigns I've played where of the Cast Dwarves that I've recruited actual Kadai destroyers and Fireborn and top tier artillery? Zero. Absolutely none at all. With the exception of one at Zaytan in Realms of Chaos, where I was deliberately going for the final battle with the drill. But beyond that, there is no campaign in the Cast Dwarves where I've gotten these, well, incredible units that could be a lot of fun to use in battle. And even if I have gotten these units, then there's no actual use for these units. If you ever reach a point in a campaign where you're recruiting Kadai destroyers as an example, as the Cast Dwarves, you've already won the campaign beyond any particular measure. And all you're really doing is just solidifying your success and grinding it out. But that doesn't mean that the experience there isn't necessarily worthwhile, from my point of view. It can certainly be fun to a certain extent, but you've beaten the campaign experience, you've beaten the game. There is very little the game will offer you past that particular point. How is this so? Well, to begin with, it's a question of difficulty, map, resources. When you start a campaign, you are at your weakest. You have limited resources and you have to make choices. And those choices do have consequences. The moment the decisions of your campaign no longer have consequences is the moment the campaign stops being meaningful in any way. So which heroes do you focus on? Which units do you recruit? How many armies do you recruit? How quickly do you recruit? Who do you go to war with? All of these are decisions in the early game that are very, very important. That is one of the things that's lacking in the late game, because in the late game, once you get to a critical stage, like over here, where, well, let's just say I have 14 armies, and that's not even the final form that I can achieve in this campaign, but once you reach a point like this in your campaign, there is very little that can stand in your way. You use crap stacks like this one to annihilate your opponents, and there's very little that they can do can stop you. The only thing that's dangerous over here are these Iron Drakes, potentially. And I already defeated Ungrim with this particular army. So there's very little that the dwarves, for instance, will be able to do to stop me over here. And Cafe, yeah, so much for Cafe. And keep in mind, the Cast Dwarves are kind of a bit in a vulnerable position, sandwiched between dwarves in the west and Gremgor and Cafe in the east, all of which do hate them. So things can go poorly very, very quickly in their campaign experience if you're not careful. But the game is very front heavy. The decisions, just inherently speaking, because we always start with low tier settlements and we have to build them up, the decisions we make in terms of just which building are you going to get up when a slot is available, those decisions do impact our early game. But they become meaningless later on because, well, you'll always have enough building slots for the things you want. Or you may not even care. You'll just mass whatever buildings you want for whatever units or economic power that you do want in a campaign. Furthermore, because of the nature of the game and the nature of the map, you are incentivized not to focus on diversity of units, diversity of recruitment, but rather instead to focus on having as many efficient armies as possible. That is one of the reasons why the late game is so bad, because recruiting tier 1 units or tier 2 units is still one of the best things you can do in a campaign. I remember there was a particular debate or a particular point made by Creative Assembly about how they had certain people who always recruited Hastati when they were playing Rome, and Rome won, and that was the best thing they could do because they could mass as many armies. Like Hastati were very easy to recruit, very easy to replace, very easy to get to the front line, and so they had players back in the days of Rome 1 that they knew of that would just recruit these crap stacks and get them to the front lines as quickly as possible and conquer as much of the map as quickly as possible. That is one of the nature of the problem. Another reason is that, well, managing a vast and powerful empire is a bloody pain in the neck in Total War. That's not even funny to actually state. There's a lot of things that you need to do with a late game empire that's just not fun. Consider the Chaos Dwarf economy that I have to manage over here. It's like all these kind of slavery arrangements that work fine when you have fewer territories, but you have to spend so much time and effort and energy to arrange when you've got a lot of territory. It does become pretty tedious pretty quickly in that respect. And it really does stop being fun in a lot of respects as well. So you do end up in a kind of situation where you really are just not enjoying the experience because of all the micromanagement. There are some mods that do help you with that, like auto scaling up of your lords and heroes, so you don't have to micromanage it every single time. But that is also another reason why the late game is not a particularly fun experience to engage in Total War, because there's a lot of things that you need to manage. And while I am fine with managing an economy, I am not really fond of the fact that, well, we do have to spend a lot of time rearranging heroes, leveling heroes, dealing with commandments. It's busy work, and it's not particularly fun work either. That is one of my problems with the way things are handled in the game right now, among many other things as well. But another issue that contributes to this problem, and I'd argue that it is the main problem, is the difficulty curve. This is a campaign on Legendary very hard. Yes, there are some mods for auto-resolve, but the experience you're getting here, at least in terms of how many armies the AI is putting together or how big their empires are, is very much the vanilla experience, pretty much. Like, well, Scrag has done wonders for itself, but so has Gelt. I do find it sort of shocking, but maybe not so much. Regardless, though, you will always kind of see these AI empires. You'll see the AI expand to a certain point, and it'll stop, then it retracts. Welcome, the wipeout, etc. That's not necessarily surprising, though. So you will see these resources. The problem with the way difficulty is handled in this game is the AI cheats. But here's the issue. And this has always been an issue with AI cheats in every single Total War game. We can look back from the originals all the way to Rome 1, Medieval 2, Attila, Rome 2, you name it. Shogun 2, notable for introducing the legendary difficulty. The way the AI cheats in the game, the way they work is not that they're not gradual cheats, they're instant cheats. So the AI is going to always have the same level of power as they did at the beginning of the campaign. The AI is never going to get more powerful as the game progresses. Because sure, they might build more territory, they might get more armies, they might get more stuff. But fundamentally, what makes the AI powerful on a higher difficulty is the fact that they have significant cheats. Cheats for growth, cheats for upkeep, and so on and so forth. That is where the AI power comes from. But this is why in every Total War game, the hardest part of the campaign is the early game. If you look back at Warhammer 2 in particular, dealing with silver rank units at like turn 10 in your campaign, or dealing with 3 hordes of Skaven, that was brutal. Playing an Emmer campaign in Warhammer 2, you'll know what I'm talking about. That was fairly brutal, to deal with. I mean, Legend of Total War is just doing a stream today. He called Emmerich one of the hardest campaigns in Total War history. Yeah, I mean, Snitch is a nasty bastard to deal with. What can I say? And lacking trade as high levels is particularly painful. But when you had like silver ranked units in Warhammer 2 from like turn 10, in like 10 turns or a bit more than that, on legendary difficulty, you kind of understand the problems that get created with AI cheating. But here's the thing. That early game experience, while very brutal, that was just how it worked initially. The AI would not get crazier as the campaign progressed. It would just kind of peter out. So even in Warhammer 2, you had this experience where, yes, the early game could be brutal, but once you overcame that and built yourself a solid enough base, and certainly this is the case in Warhammer 3, you build yourself a strong empire early on, as any race, as any campaign, any faction, any legendary lord, and you've proven you overcome the AI capabilities. And there's nothing the AI can do about that. Maybe that is a particular point worthy of discussion, that the AI should have more gradual bonuses as a campaign progresses, that they should have the ability of recruiting more armies, that they should have a better upkeep, that they should form confederations easier. That would be something that would add to the late game. Because like, consider this is a turn 60 campaign, and this is what I would define the late game, and you can see how divided Wolf 1 still is. If this were to change, if, say, for instance, you're playing a campaign as Malekith, you unified the entirety of the Dark Elves, and then you had to face all of Wolf 1, that would be great. I would probably say, like, turn 80, all of Wolf 1 should be united against the Dark Elves, something along those lines. But make it a gradual experience, not something like, oh, every 10 turns the bonus goes there. Maybe a 5-turn gradual increase here and there, 1%, 5%, 3%, something like that. I think that would help. But I'm not a game developer. I can recognize and analyze an issue. I am not necessarily going to offer the best solutions. But I do believe the fact that the AI, the difficulty curve is inverted, where the early game is the hardest part of any campaign and the late game is the easiest part, is probably not the way that the game should be designed. And that is really on Creative Assembly, because the way they've decided to build their games, the way they handle difficulty in general, is built around that. Now, there's been accusations thrown at Creative Assembly that they push for aggressive early campaigns. In fact, I was told as much by someone who had actually worked in Creative Assembly that the marketing team pushes for that. This is one of the things that I feel should be changed. Now, don't get me wrong, I am fine with fast, quick, and easy, not easy necessarily, but fast and quick campaigns. I'm fine with that. But it would be nice to actually be able to utilize the full rosters of these races and have a reason to do so. Because right now, there isn't really a reason to utilize the full roster. It's just a waste of money in your campaign. But if you actually were encountering threats that couldn't just be defeated by, say, nasty Skulkers or Hobgoblins, then you would have a reason to invest in an army like this. And mind you, there were reasons to invest in these kind of armies. They're just going to smash everything in their path. But I could certainly do it with just Hobgoblins alone in a Chaos Dwarf campaign. So all the resources, all the armaments, everything that I've been producing in this campaign are just fluff in a lot of ways, because the tier 1 units I have could have handled the vast majority of them. And if I hadn't spent so much time, money, and energy on investing in resources, I actually could have built up my gold income better to be able to support more of those armies of Hobgoblins. But if you did genuinely have threats that did require higher tier units to defeat, which you do not at the moment, that would be better. There's also the issue of how recruitment is handled. So, for instance, you have a building that just recruits certain units. I think like it would just be better of actually copying what Pharaoh did. Yes, Total War Pharaoh did have some great ideas. So in Total War Pharaoh, you had early game recruitment that you could put like in a minor settlement, recruit some early game units. And it wouldn't just be melee units, it would be range units, it would be chariots. So it really pushed for the diversity of your armies. Chariots were useless, but melee and archers, javelins, you would naturally go towards diversity. You didn't have units locked behind different buildings. So instead of like 3 different advanced military buildings, how about just 1 advanced military building, and your capacity can be increased in other ways? That is just an idea. I'm not saying these things would be easy to do in Warhammer 3, but some of these things should certainly be changed for the next Total War game. I do think Pharaoh, for all the issues it does have, does provide a template for how things could be better. And also the difficulty customization of Pharaoh is certainly a nice feature. Finally, the map itself. Let's talk about this. The map itself does lend itself towards early game aggression far more. Now, I want to be clear on this. There are hard limitations on how big a map can be. Modders have figured out that you can make a map, but only to a certain size until the AI just cannot handle the sheer scope of it. Old World is approaching that limit. Immortal Empires is smaller, but not necessarily by much, than Old World. So Creative Assembly really wanted to make a map of the entire world, but the cost of that has been the quality of each individual zone. I think this is one of the reasons why Old World is so popular, because you have more spread out settlements. You actually have more settlements than Immortal Empires, but more spread out. You actually have to plan a campaign, whereas in Immortal Empires you do a lot of settlement hopping. There is no settlement that you can't reach in more than 2 turns at most. Wherever you are in a settlement, you'll always reach another settlement in 2 turns at most in Immortal Empires. Some major exceptions do exist in it, but that's the obvious situation. Whereas in Old World, you are required minimum to spend 2 turns to get to a settlement, and more often than not, you're going to spend 3, even 4 turns getting from one settlement to the next. Why is that important? Well, the reason that's important has to do with one of the things that pushes early game aggression in a game. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter how good your income is, how good your growth is. It's still going to take time to build towards that late game. It's going to take the AI time to build up. For all its cheat, they are still bound by building time. And so you have an early game, you have a very fast early game where you can capture a lot of territory in Immortal Empires, but in Old World, it takes longer, and that's why Old World is actually better in the late game, because factions build up in that campaign. You're not running around in Old World with 14 fucking armies at turn 60 as any faction, just because you don't capture that much territory to be able to support that. You could do it with someone like Cafe or the Greenskins, but you are probably going to bankrupt yourself to push 14 armies by turn 60. It is not doable. Simple as that. Just because the settlements are so spread apart, you can't capture them. And by not capturing them, you're missing out experience, you're missing out post-battle, you're missing out sacking and looting income. That is one of the flaws, the deep flaws, if you will, of Immortal Empires as a map, that you have this settlement hopping mechanic from turn to turn. By the way, you can excuse a lot of things about Immortal Empires because they were trying to represent the world, and there is a hard engine limit apparently about what they can do. One of the things I would tell people that, they want the Old World to include the entire map, that's not going to happen, it shouldn't happen. But one thing I do not justify from Creative Assembly is how bad the ROC map, the Realms of Chaos map is, because Realms of Chaos still is settlement hopping from one settlement to the next. Sure, it's more often than not that it might take you 2 turns as opposed to just 1, but there's a lot more settlement hopping in that one than you might believe. Like, I've played Realms of Chaos campaigns recently, and I gotta tell you, it is a fucking terrible map on every single level. The fact that they designed that as a baseline, well, maybe that should clue you in as to what the issues of Immortal Empires are and where they came from. Because while Immortal Empires in a lot of ways is better than the Realms of Chaos map, the same people that probably worked on those maps worked on both of them. I think my working theory on this is that maybe Creative Assembly, beyond the hard engine limits, they wanted to highlight the siege the revamped settlement battles, the minor settlement battles, and revamped sieges. Except those sieges and settlement battles are garbage, and we have to fight them because every settlement in the game gets an auto-resolve benefit. There's mods to remove that. I recommend you do so because it makes for a better experience. Also, actually can end up making the AI more interesting to deal with in a campaign. Not necessarily more aggressive. Like, if you think the AI is going to be more aggressive with that, no, it's not. But it won't lose as many troops trying to take settlements, so they'll actually achieve more. It does make for a better campaign dynamic than you might otherwise have. Less annoying, crappy battles, potentially more potentially the AI not losing half its army trying to assault one of your settlements just because the garrison has a not resolved benefit. Those would be some of the points I would bring up about why the late game is not particularly great. So, inverted difficulty curve, poor map design, a focus on post-battle loot and early aggression as opposed to late aggression, the early game mattering a lot, the late game not mattering at all. Now, I want to be crystal on this. Realm Divide as a mechanic in Shogun 2 was not good. The reason it was not good is it started a war with the entire world. However, the endgame crisis is not a particularly great mechanic either. I do feel that if you're playing, say, if you're creating a mega alliance like this, then certain factions should turn against you. One of the things that Troy, a Total War Saga Troy, did brilliantly, and I know people don't like Troy for good reason, it had like the antagonist faction. But I think one of the things we could have happening in a campaign, like say of this nature, is we could have like a kind of global war sparking between the Order title, if you will, and the forces of destruction. So, you know, Chaos gave an alliance, for instance, in this case, going up against the forces of Order. And that could make for an interesting dynamic. I think actually the best mechanic that Creative Assembly could potentially use would actually be the fall of the samurai civil war mechanic to some extent. And if certain factions wanted to be neutral in that or pick their side, like the ogres, that would also be a great way of doing it. But like, let's actually have a global war. One of the brilliant things as well is like the Kastorf endgame crisis, because it gives you all these portals around the world that you can use, making for a very interesting campaign dynamic that you can use those portals. In fact, I would probably recommend playing with the endgame. If you want to make a better late game, set the endgame crisis to be the castors, put that out around turn 50, and then go with those portals. Play Grombrindle with those portals and go smash some skulls alongside your fellow dwarfs. That could be an interesting campaign. The tools are there if Creative Assembly wanted to do it. I think really Fall of Samurai had a brilliant late game in that respect. The Republic one, yeah, that wasn't particularly great. You just ended up fighting everyone. But hey, if you just want to play a This Is Total War campaign, I guess that would be the original of it. Questin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.